here, and I'm bringing you Captain Jeff's Fun and Easy American History. The whole idea of what we're going to do for you is to give you a series, 10 to 15 minutes, of the kind of American history that hasn't been given to you in class. We're not going to get overwhelmed by dates and whatever. But what we're going to do is give you kind of a process that we go through. And as we go, you will get sheets of notes in front of each lesson. And like I said, it's only going to be about 10 minutes long. And these notes, you can use your snip tool on your PC to take this out and save it, or to print it out so you can follow along. Now, our intention is to give you some of the background. This is a foundation course. You're going to take other courses as you go through. If you're in high school, you're going to take an American history course. You're going to take another one in college. If you've just immigrated to the United States, this will give you some background. It's not to take the test, but what it'll do is it'll help you understand the context of the United States and what makes us us. I'm trying to give you the stories that you won't hear in So where we're going from here is we're going to talk about going way back to about 1620. In 1620, the separatists from England, who were Protestant, came into were on the Mayflower, and they were traveling to Virginia initially, but the weather was so bad they couldn't make it to Virginia. So they ended up being pushed aside and ending up on a place in Cape Cod. As a matter of fact, Cape Cod, as you know, is kind of shaped like an arm. Well, up here at the top of this arm, that's where Provincetown today is. And if you travel there, you'll see a large tower called the Pilgrim Tower. That's where they stayed. Now, when they came into the United States, colonists counted on 2 years, what they call the starving times. The starving times were the times where they had to take their seed and grow other crops. The second year, they would take half of their seed for the next year's crops. So until they get through the second year, they had to live off of what they had, what they brought with them on the ship. Well, when they came to Cape Cod, they met a Wampanoag Indian. Now, the Wampanoags, they were part of the Narragansett tribe. And the chief of the Wampanoags was Massasoit. The Massasoit were almost wiped out by the Abenaki. There was an altercation about hunting grounds. This was like 250 years before the landing of what we call pilgrims today. They were separatists at the time, running from a King James Catholic England. They were just recovering. So Massasoit, he saw a good thing with the pilgrims, because the pilgrims, look, they had a big ship. They had lots of things on the ship. They had steel cookware, they had guns, and they had European military training. Now, interestingly enough, there had been other explorations down there, and a fellow by the name of Grosvenor captured a young Wampanoag by the name of Squanto. Squanto was sold into slavery in Spain and finally worked his way to England, where he learned the language and learned the culture. He came with the pilgrims and was invaluable as far as translating and being that intermediary between Massasoit and the Wampanoag Indians and the colonists. Now, we'll find later that Massasoit had a son, and the son's name was Metacomet. The English called him King Philip. King Philip, turns out, was probably the key person, I would argue, that set the relationship between Indian, and understand I'm using the word Indian because that's the word that they used then. I'm not using Native American like we use now. His relationship with the white settlers, the colonists, that I think may have set the overall relationship for the next 150 years between the red man and the white man. So let's look at some of these key Indian tribes. We talked about the Abenaki. The Abenaki came south, and they were basically a Canadian tribe. They are one of the tribes that the Norsemen had difficulty with. The Norsemen called them Skraelings. The Narragansett were throughout New England, and the Narragansett tribe, the larger tribe, had sub-tribes with it. They had the Wampanoag, they had the Pequot, and they had the Mohegan. As a matter of fact, go up to Connecticut now and you can go gambling at the Mohegan Sun Casino. When we look going east, we'll look at the Iroquois League. The Iroquois League basically was throughout New York, and their home was called a longhouse. And in this longhouse were 5 tribes. The east end of the longhouse was protected by the Mohawk Indians. The west end was protected by the Seneca Indians. In the middle were the Oneida, the Onondaga, and the Cayuga. The Oneida, these were the Indians that did much of the consulting effort and ran, worked on treaties and whatever. By the way, most of the treaties from this time you can still have access to through the Mohawk tribe, which is up in Ontario, Canada. The Onondaga, being in the center, they held the council fire. And the legend is that as long as that council fire was lit, the Iroquois League would go on. The Iroquois League was originally set, according to legend, by Hiawatha, Longfellow's on the shores of Gitche-Gumee by the Bright Sea waters, stand the teepee of Tecumseh. You can read the rest yourself. The Seneca closed the door on the west. As history would play out, there was a lot of discord amongst the Iroquois. As the British moved west, they had altercations with the French. And of course, the British and the French were always at war. The Mohawk in the east tend to lean more towards the British. The Seneca in the west leaned more towards the French. It created some very interesting dynamics. If we go from north to south, we'll get down to Georgia, Florida. Down in this area, we have the Creek Nation with its sub-nations. But the Creek Nation was the powerful nation like the Iroquois was to the Mohawk and Oneida. One of the sub-tribes was the Seminole. So the Seminole are in Florida today, and they also run a very profitable casino and other businesses. There were altercations with the Creeks. As a matter of fact, the Creeks in the First Seminole War was in 1817 and 1818 with General Andrew Jackson. The interesting thing about this was after the Battle of New Orleans and before Jackson became president. They moved the Seminoles, who they defeated as being a sub-tribe of the Creek, to the Oklahoma Territory in 1821. Another interesting thing about this is the war that Davy Crockett, who would become a congressman from Tennessee for several terms, and who stood with Travis and the others in the Alamo until they were defeated by Santa Anna's Mexican troops. This is where Davy Crockett got his military experience. As a matter of fact, he led a whole group of Tennesseans down there. The interesting thing, Davy Crockett and his Tennesseans, of course, they were militia. They had to go home to take care of their farms. So they wanted to go home, and General Jackson did not want them to go home because militia at the time, once they left, they seldom came back. Well, Davy Crockett told him that he would come back, and Jackson decided he wasn't going to go. So they met. Davy Crockett and his Tennesseans met Andrew Jackson's cannon, and they had a face-off, and Davy Crockett and his Tennesseans walked by the cannon and went home. Much to Andrew Jackson's surprise, they did come back for the next season. As we move along, we'll move a little farther west. When we get to farther west, let's look at Ohio and Michigan, Kentucky, and the western part of Pennsylvania. In the north, in Canada, were the Huron Indians. Chief of the Hurons in 1763 was a fellow by the name of Pontiac. Pontiac was a war chief, and at this time, the British had taken over a French fort in Detroit. This is before Detroit, called Fort Pontchartrain. Pontiac laid siege to the fort and ruled the countryside outside the fort for almost a year. Finally, he was defeated and killed. And if we look a little farther down from Huron, which is right on the upper peninsula, the UP of Michigan, and upper Michigan mainland, beneath that was the Potawatomi. Beneath that, and more to the west, were the Miami. And the next tribe, which was a key tribe, and probably one of the most powerful tribes, were the Shawnee. The Shawnee at this time were led by a chief by the name of Blue Jacket. He was a Shawnee war chief, and he resisted white settlement in the area until his death in 1810. Very powerful chief. One of the interesting things about the Shawnee was the Shawnee used to run raiding and slaving raids down into North Carolina against the Cherokee. So you see, when we deal with raids, like raids of conquest, genocide, slavery, this had a place in our American Indians or Native Americans, as it did in Europe. So we have to look at when we look at these topics as important topics. Yeah, right. I've reached the end of my time in this segment. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Kickapoo